Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It's a strange kind of humiliation, standing in your father's kitchen as a guest, while your stepmother flits around in that too tight silk blouse, giving orders with a smile that feels like a slap. The air was heavy with something unspoken, something old and moldy, like resentment that had been buried for so long it started to rot. I hadn't planned on coming, but the guilt creeps in this time of year. Dad's birthday. 71 years on this earth, most of them spent with his hands on fire hoses or fixing things that should have been thrown away. And here I was, 37, unmarried, back in the same house where I'd learned to tie my shoes, now as a visitor, an outsider. Linda, my stepmother, had a way of decorating that made the place look like a catalog, but feel nothing like home. Everything matched. Beige curtains, taupe throw pillows, fake lemons in a glass bowl on the counter, but none of it felt lived in. My mother's pictures were long gone, replaced by sailboats and fake family portraits from a J.C. Penney shoot. I stood next to the fridge, holding a lukewarm cup of decaf coffee she'd offered like a peace treaty, and tried not to say anything that would get me kicked out before the candles were lit. Dad sat in his recliner, old man cardigan zipped up to his neck even though it was 73 degrees inside. He didn't say much these days. Conversations were more like grunts sprinkled with nods. I caught his eye a few times, and he smiled. That familiar half-smile. He used to give me after soccer practice, but he didn't get up, didn't motion for a hug, just smiled and turned back to the muted television where some history documentary played about warships and men with better stories than mine. Linda was all pearls and pastel lipstick, gliding from counter to table, adjusting forks and calling everyone hun. She made sure the cake was the centerpiece. Triple layer vanilla almond with lemon buttercream. Looked homemade. I doubted she baked it. She'd never been the kind to smell like flour or vanilla extract. She was more of a buy it then lie about it kind of woman. When she lit the candles, she called for everyone, her bridge friends, some neighbors I barely knew, and my cousin Kevin, who I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. Everyone filed in like it was church, murmuring about how young Dad looked, how spry he was for his age, how lucky he was to have such a loving wife. I stood behind them, the only one without a chair, balancing my coffee cup on a paper napkin with pink tulips on it. No one offered me a seat. No one even looked back. Then Linda turned to me, just as she was about to bring the cake over, and leaned in. Her voice was low and smooth, like the underside of a snake. She said, "Why don't you wait outside, Ava? We'll just do the cake real quick with your dad." She smiled like she'd just asked me to check the mail. Not a flicker of shame, not even the courtesy of pretending it was about space or timing. Just out. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to crack or explode. I just put the coffee down, walked through the kitchen, and stepped outside like a well-trained dog. No one stopped me, not even Dad. I waited for someone to say my name, even in a whisper, but all I heard behind me was the clinking of forks and the forced laughter of people who'd already decided which side they were on. The backyard was still the same cracked patio stones, same rusted bird bath. I sat on the porch steps and stared at the patch of grass where my old swing set used to be. The metal frame had been taken down years ago, but the dirt patch was still visible, like a scar. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 20 minutes, maybe an hour. The sun was starting to dip below the roofline, and the wind had that late fall bite that sneaks through your jacket no matter how tightly you wrap it. I thought about leaving, just walking back to my car, starting the engine and letting them wonder. But then I thought about Dad. I still loved him. I think I did. Even if he had stopped standing up for me years ago, even if he had let Linda erase my mother's memory, inch by inch, room by room. I stayed, even though I had every reason not to. I only noticed the flashing lights because of the reflection in the kitchen window. Red and blue, pulsing, silent. My first thought was that someone in the neighborhood got hurt. Some kid fell off a bike. Maybe an old lady passed out on her lawn. I turned toward the driveway, expecting to see a fire truck or maybe an ambulance, but it was a police cruiser. The doors opened, and 2 officers stepped out. One male, one female, both wearing those expressions that are trying not to be alarming, which only makes them more unsettling. They walked straight toward me. "Ma'am," the male officer said, "are you Ava Carter?" I nodded, feeling a weird tightness in my chest. "We need to speak with you," the woman added. "There's been an incident." An incident. Not an accident. Not a problem. An incident. And just like that, I knew something was wrong. I knew, without even hearing it, that whatever came next was going to rip open something I thought I had buried years ago. And I hadn't even gotten a slice of that damn cake. When people say time slows down, they usually mean it in some poetic, blurry kind of way, like they're drifting through a dream or watching someone else's life through frosted glass. But when I saw the cops walk across the lawn toward me, time didn't slow down. It snapped into razor-sharp focus. Every sound sharpened, from the crunch of gravel beneath their boots to the wind, brushing the brittle leaves against the gutter. My heart wasn't pounding. It was clicking, mechanical and cold, like a metronome out of sync. I stood up because I knew sitting down would make me look weak, and weakness in that moment felt like a risk I couldn't afford. The male officer, tall and built like someone who wrestled in high school and never stopped working out, stepped forward first. His badge caught the last sliver of sun, and for a split second, it reflected straight into my eyes. I squinted, maybe more than I needed to, but it gave me time to swallow whatever was trying to crawl up my throat. "Are you Ava Carter?" he asked again, even though I'd already nodded. "Yes," I said, and my voice didn't shake, though I could feel the skin around my eyes tightening like I was trying not to blink. "We're going to need to speak with you," the woman said. Her voice was softer, not kind exactly, but measured, like she'd done this before and learned how to smooth the edges of the worst kinds of conversations. I didn't move. "What happened?" "There's been a medical emergency, pal," the male cop replied. "Inside the residence. Your father collapsed not long after you stepped out. Paramedics are with him now." I looked at the house, at the faint outline of bodies through the frosted glass on the back door. Nobody had come outside, not even Linda. "Collapsed how?" I asked, because my father wasn't the kind of man who just fell over. He was stubborn, unkillable, or so I thought. The man had smoked for 25 years, pulled people out of burning buildings, survived 2 marriages, and still mowed his lawn in July heat waves. "It appears to have been sudden," the officer said. "We don't have details yet." That's when the paramedics wheeled the stretcher out through the side gate. They moved fast, too fast for someone who had a chance. I didn't see his face, just the shape under the blanket, a flash of his boot, and the top of his head peeking through the oxygen mask. That mask alone nearly broke me. I'd never seen my father look small before. And that's what he was in that moment. Small, fragile, like a balloon that had finally lost its fight with gravity. I started walking toward the gate without waiting for permission. No one stopped me, but before I could get more than a few steps, the woman officer touched my elbow gently. "You can follow us to the hospital, but we do need to ask you a few questions, if that's all right." "Ask me on the way," I said. "I'm not staying here." They let me ride in the back of the cruiser. No handcuffs, nothing dramatic, but I could feel the stares from the neighbors as we pulled out. One of Linda's friends stood on the porch, hands over her mouth like she was posing for a tabloid. I didn't wave. I didn't even look back. At the hospital, the waiting room was quiet in that sterile, humming way that makes everything feel fake. I sat alone while the officers murmured with the front desk. I was still wearing my jacket. My arms crossed so tight my shoulders ached. I hadn't even realized my hands were shaking until the woman next to me, someone's aunt or maybe a volunteer, handed me a styrofoam cup of water. I didn't drink it. A man in scrubs finally came out. Young, red hair, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept since last Wednesday. He didn't introduce himself. He just looked at me the way people look at dogs on the side of the road, unsure if they're lost or just too stupid to move. "Ava Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I said, standing up too fast. "Is he okay? My dad?" The way he sighed made me want to punch a hole in the vending machine. We did everything we could. I'm sorry. Your father didn't make it. Just like that. Didn't make it. Like he missed a flight or failed a test. Not like he died in a room less than 40 feet away from me while I was sitting on concrete steps wondering if Linda had used real butter in that cake. I didn't cry, not then. Not even later, when the cops asked more questions, or when Linda finally showed up 2 hours later in a different outfit, full makeup, and no visible signs of distress. I just nodded, answered what they asked. What time did you leave the house? How long were you outside? Did your father complain about chest pain? Did he say anything unusual before the incident? I think I was outside for maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes, I said, not looking at either of them. Definitely not more than a full hour and 45 minutes. It didn't hit me until I saw the cop's eyebrow twitch. My own words were off. Way off. A full hour and 45 minutes? That was either way too long or too short, depending on how you looked at it. And judging by the twitch in his face, he was looking at it pretty closely. Linda walked in then, dramatically out of breath as if she jogged there from across town. She was talking to a nurse, her voice raised just enough to make a scene. I just left for 10 minutes. I only stepped out to call my sister. I didn't think he'd... Ava? Her eyes found me like a heat-seeking missile. What happened? Were you with him when he... I didn't answer. I just looked at her. Studied the way her mascara stayed perfectly dry. The way her hair hadn't moved from the style she wore at the party. She had changed out of the pale pink blouse and now wore a navy cardigan, the kind someone might wear to a memorial. Already, she didn't ask what the doctor said. She didn't ask where the body was. She only said one thing to the cops when they asked about the timeline. She seemed off, Linda said, gesturing at me with her long, manicured fingers. Earlier, before she left, I think she was upset with him. I don't know exactly why, but she was acting strange. Strange. That word landed like a dart between my ribs. She wasn't crying, but she wanted them to see me as unstable. That was her game. Plant seeds. Sit back and watch them grow. The female cop shifted uncomfortably but didn't say anything. The male one started scribbling something down in his notebook. And right then, right in the middle of all of it, I realized something that made my skin crawl. Linda didn't look shocked. She looked prepared. Grief doesn't announce itself the way they say it does. There was no thunderous wave, no wob that shook my shoulders, no cinematic moment in which I collapsed to the floor and screamed up at the heavens. Instead, it arrived like static, a low humming in the background of everything, just loud enough to ruin silence, just soft enough that no one else seemed to hear it. I sat in the hallway of the hospital, back against a vending machine that blinked exact change only, and tried to wrap my head around the fact that my father, who seemed like the immovable object of my life, was gone, just like that. Gone after a goddamn slice of cake. Linda had gone into full performance mode once the shock had settled in. She cried when the nurses came by. She cried when she called her sister. She cried so delicately, with perfectly timed sniffles and not one smudged eyelash, that it felt rehearsed. Like she'd watched too many Hallmark movies and decided that was the blueprint. She didn't come near me after her little Ava seemed off stunt in front of the cops. I think she knew better. I wasn't the type to lose it in public, not because I was above it, but because I preferred to collect all the pieces before setting them on fire. Detective Reyes was the one who eventually sat down across from me, not in a patronizing way, not like he was here to deliver bad news wrapped in polite disinterest. He sat like he knew I wasn't stupid, like he understood that people don't just fall over and die 20 minutes after their daughter's been asked to wait outside. There was something tired in his eyes, but not the kind of tired that comes from boredom. This was the kind of tired that suggested he'd seen enough families pretend to love each other until a will got read. He pulled out a notepad and flipped through a few pages, then paused, as if deciding how to start. "Miss Carter," he began, voice low and even, "do you know if your father had made any recent changes to his legal documents?" A will, power of attorney, anything like that? That was not the question I expected, and for a second I just blinked at him. Changes? No, I didn't even know he had a will. We weren't exactly sharing estate plans over dinner. He nodded like he already knew the answer. We're looking into some things. Your stepmother has submitted a copy of a revised will dated 3 weeks ago that leaves everything to her. The house, the bank accounts, the pension, even a piece of property upstate that your father apparently inherited from his brother. Did you know about that? No, I said slowly, because everything inside me had started to go cold. I didn't know he had anything upstate, and I definitely didn't know he'd leave everything to her. Reyes tapped his pen against the notepad, once like a metronome. Neither did his attorney. That landed harder than anything else had since I got to the hospital. I leaned forward slightly, my brain spinning through memories and conversations and every weird interaction I'd had with Linda in the last year. What do you mean? He reached into his folder and pulled out a photocopy of a document. This is the signature on the most recent version of the will. It's problematic. Your father's attorney says he never saw this draft, wasn't the one who processed it, and believes the signature doesn't match prior documents. I stared at the paper. Even without being a handwriting expert, I could see the difference. My dad's real signature was messy, tight, angled like someone always in a rush. This one was smoother, more spaced out, almost hesitant, like someone trying to copy it from memory. Are you saying she forged it? I asked, not bothering to pretend I didn't know who she meant. I'm saying, Reyes said carefully, that we're opening an investigation into the circumstances surrounding your father's death, and that includes any legal inconsistencies. We're also requesting a full autopsy. Preliminary observations didn't indicate foul play, but sometimes it's what's not there that tells us something. I didn't say anything. I was too busy remembering how Linda insisted on cutting the cake herself, how she pulled it from the fridge like it was some sacred ritual, how she stood beside my father, feeding him that first bite with a fork like he was some kind of prince on his throne. I thought it was performative, a power move meant to ice me out. I hadn't considered there might have been something more behind it. Reyes continued, Do you recall anything unusual about that cake? Anything about your father's behavior right after eating it? I almost laughed. Unusual? Only that I wasn't allowed to be in the same room while they cut it. That made him raise his eyebrows. She asked you to leave? She told me to wait outside, like a dog. He wrote that down, not word for word, but I saw his hand pause just long enough that I knew he'd remember the phrasing. After he left, I sat in the silence and thought about how easily people disappear. Not just physically, but from the stories they should have had a say in. My father didn't even get to tell me goodbye, and now Linda was rewriting his last chapter like he was just a minor character in her drama. I thought about how she changed the curtains after my mother died, how she replaced the china, repainted the living room, and slowly erased every trace of the life we had before she walked in, with her fake charm and low-fat casseroles. And now she wanted the rest. The house, the land, the money, my father's entire legacy, carved up and served with a plastic fork. But here's the thing. Linda didn't know who she was dealing with. I wasn't the angry teenager she used to corner in the hallway and guilt into silence. I wasn't the woman who'd bite her tongue at every condescending remark. I had learned from both of my parents, my mother's fire and my father's patience. And together, those two things made me dangerous when I needed to be. And now I needed to be. The autopsy would take a few days. The legal investigation would stretch even longer. But I wasn't going to wait around hoping justice would fall from the sky. I was going to dig. I was going to pull at every thread until the whole lie unraveled. Because if Linda thought she could poison her way into a fortune and pin the blame on me with some fake signature and a sad face, then she didn't just underestimate me. She made a mistake, a big one. And I was going to make sure she never forgot it. Grief has sharp corners. It doesn't just hurt. It scrapes, it tears, and it lingers in the most inconvenient places, like behind your teeth or at the base of your skull. I woke up the morning after the hospital visit with a pounding behind my eyes. The kind of pain that isn't from crying, but from holding everything in too tightly. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Something about the way Linda had looked at me, like she was watching a script unfold perfectly, had turned every emotion I felt into a kind of fuel. And now I was fully lit. I started with the obvious. My dad's lawyer, Robert Ellison, was a man I hadn't spoken to in years, but I remembered his office downtown, a brick building sandwiched between a vape shop and a chiropractor that didn't accept insurance. I showed up without an appointment, and the secretary at the front desk, a woman in her 60s with a stiff perm and a face that said she'd seen it all, looked up over her bifocals and said, "If you're here about the will, you're not the first." That gave me pause, but I nodded and asked if Mr. Ellison was in. She led me to a small office where Robert, looking older and paler than I remembered, stood up slowly and extended a hand. "I thought you might come," he said, and there was no pretense of surprise in his voice. He gestured for me to sit, and I didn't waste time. I told him about the signature, about Detective Reyes, about Linda crying without tears and changing her blouse before showing up at the hospital. Robert listened in silence, his fingers steepled under his chin, the picture of patience and measured thought. When I finished, he reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a folder. "This," he said as he slid the papers toward me, "is the last valid will I filed for your father, dated just under a year ago. He left the house to you, set up a trust in your name with a modest inheritance, and designated Linda as caretaker of his estate in the event of his death. But only until you turned 40. It was his way of keeping the peace, I think." I stared at the documents, the neat lines of type, the unmistakable scrawl of my father's true signature at the bottom. "So the new will is fake," he sighed. "Not definitively, yet. But there are inconsistencies. The notary listed isn't registered with the state. The date conflicts with other documented events. And the witness signatures are both people I've never heard of. Your father was a cautious man. He wouldn't have changed his will without telling me, not after 30 years. I swallowed the lump in my throat, and he wouldn't have given Linda everything. "No," Robert agreed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not unless he was pressured, or worse." That was all I needed to hear. I spent the next 2 days digging, not metaphorically. I went through drawers, files, and storage boxes at my father's house while Linda was grieving at her sister's place upstate. I had the spare key. I knew where the old stuff was, the real stuff. My mother's journals, old tax forms, prescription records. I found a locked drawer in his bedroom, and I picked it the way he taught me when I was 16 and bored on a rainy Sunday. Inside, I found a pharmacy receipt for a refill on his blood thinner medication, dated 3 days before his birthday. Next to it was a bottle with exactly 5 pills left. He should have had at least 20. I kept digging. In the kitchen, tucked behind a cookbook full of untried recipes, I found a manila envelope labeled "Carter, Emergency Only." Inside were copies of old wills, correspondence with Robert, and a handwritten letter I almost couldn't read because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It was dated 10 days before he died. "Ava," it began. "If you're reading this, something happened. I've been feeling off lately. Foggy. I think Linda's been giving me more than just my usual meds. I'm not accusing her, yet. But I've started hiding a few pills to test my theory. Don't tell her. Watch her. And go to Robert if I'm not around. My father, suspicious, careful, watching her, dead days later." I took the letter, the pill bottle, and the pharmacy receipt and drove straight to Detective Reyes. He wasn't surprised to see me, but he was very interested in the items I laid out across his desk. He called in a tech team to collect the evidence, took my statement again, and then told me something that turned my stomach inside out. "We got the cake analyzed," he said. "At your suggestion, we found trace amounts of aspirin in the frosting." "Aspirin?" I repeated, trying to piece it together. "In combination with his blood thinners, it could have caused severe internal bleeding. It wouldn't show obvious signs immediately. To a casual observer, it would look like a sudden collapse, natural causes. I sat there not breathing. She killed him. He didn't confirm or deny. We can't prove she intended to, not yet. But we're building a case, and we filed for a formal search warrant for the residence. I nodded slowly. She's going to see this coming. He leaned back in his chair. Maybe, but you're not just a daughter anymore. You're a witness, and if she forged that will, that's fraud, plain and simple. I left the precinct with a mind full of sharp edges. Revenge wasn't an impulse anymore. It was a plan. A slow, meticulous unraveling of every false thread Linda had stitched into our family tapestry. She thought she could rewrite history, cut out the inconvenient parts, and wear grief like a costume. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to understand, was that I don't forget. I don't forgive easily, and I don't let people like her win without a fight. She wanted what she thought was owed to her. She took more than that. Now it was my turn. The morning I decided to confront Linda, the sky was one of those dull, uncommitted grays that always makes the world look like it hasn't fully woken up yet. Not stormy, not clear, just indifferent. It matched my mood perfectly. I had slept for exactly 2 hours, if you could call it sleep, since my mind had spent the entire night crawling through every memory, every sideways glance, every too sweet smile Linda ever gave me, all the way back to the first day she moved into our house with her neatly pressed blouses and perfume that made me think of old soap. There had always been something off about her, a kind of performative sweetness that didn't mask the chill underneath. And now I was beginning to realize that it hadn't been in my head all these years. It had been deliberate, methodical, and rooted in something much darker than insecurity or pettiness. I didn't call ahead. I didn't knock. I used my key because the house still technically belonged to my father, and pending the outcome of the investigation, might still legally be mine. She was in the kitchen, of course, where she always pretended to be useful, standing by the island with her phone in one hand and a glass of something lemon-colored in the other. She wore a silk robe like she was starring in some community theater production about elegant widows and betrayed love. The second she saw me, she straightened, and her mouth curled into that artificial half-smile she reserved for people she planned to manipulate. "Ava," she said, as if she had been expecting me and wasn't surprised at all that I had walked in without so much as a text message. "I thought you'd call first. Give me time to clean up. I've had so many visitors." I didn't respond to that. I just placed the manila envelope on the kitchen island and watched her eyes flick down to it like she already knew what was inside, or at least feared it was something that could ruin her. "You might want to sit," I said, not because I was concerned for her, but because I wanted to take the power out of her voice before she had a chance to use it again. She didn't sit. Of course she didn't. Instead, she reached for the envelope, as slowly and elegantly as she could muster, then opened it with one fingernail like she was unwrapping a delicate gift. Inside were copies of everything. The forged will with the shaky signature, the notarization from a non-existent clerk, the pharmacy records showing the refill timing for my father's medication, the toxicology report linking the cake frosting to crushed aspirin, and most importantly, the handwritten letter my father had left behind, warning me in the only way he could that something wasn't right. Her hand trembled slightly as she read it, and I watched her face as something subtle but unmistakable flickered across it. Not fear exactly, not even guilt, but something closer to recognition. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had prepared for this possibility, but still hoped it wouldn't come to pass. "I assume this is your idea of justice?" she asked, finally looking up, her voice just barely holding onto its usual polish. "Dragging your own family through the mud? Going through drawers like a nosy little rat?" "No," I said, my tone even, measured. "This is my idea of not letting a murderer steal a house she didn't earn and a name she never deserved." Her mouth twitched, but she didn't reply. She folded the papers neatly, as if tidiness could somehow neutralize their contents, then set them back on the island and reached for her glass like this was just another conversation. "You don't have proof," she said. "You have..." Suspicions, paperwork, coincidences. But none of that is proof. Your father died of a heart attack. That's what the preliminary report said. You're right, I replied. But the final autopsy says drug interaction contributed. Combined with the pharmacy records in the letter, it's enough for the district attorney to open a case. And we both know what happens when they start digging. Her face didn't change. That was the most terrifying part. No breakdown, no denial, not even the decency to look away. Just that calm, calculated stare, like this was a game of chess, and she had already planned her next 3 moves. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was that I wasn't interested in beating her anymore. I was interested in ruining her. I've already spoken to the local paper, I continued. They're running a story tomorrow about elder abuse, forged wills, suspicious deaths. They won't name you, not yet, but they'll strongly suggest it. And when the neighbors read it, when the bridge club starts whispering, when your Pilates instructor avoids eye contact at the grocery store, well, that's not on me. That's on you. You think I care about gossip? She asked, her voice tight for the first time. You think I care what these small-town fools think about me? No, I said. I think you care about being seen as the grieving widow, and I'm going to take that away from you, slowly, publicly, legally. For the first time since I walked into that kitchen, she was speechless, and that silence was sweeter than any victory I could have imagined. I turned and walked out without waiting for a response, the sound of my shoes on the tile echoing like punctuation. She didn't follow me. She didn't call after me. I didn't expect her to. She wasn't stupid. She knew the war was over, or at least this battle was, Detective Reyes called later that afternoon. He said they were moving forward with charges related to the forged will and potential fraud. The toxicology evidence wasn't enough for a murder charge, but the forged legal documents, combined with the testimony and the pharmacy inconsistencies, gave them more than enough to start building their case. He thanked me for being thorough. I thanked him for believing me. The funeral was small. Linda didn't attend. She said something about migraines and stress, but everyone knew the truth. The real truth. Not the polished lie she fed to people when they were too polite to ask follow-up questions. I stood at my father's grave with a single yellow rose, the same kind my mother used to keep in the garden, and I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered something only he and I would understand, then walked away with the kind of peace that doesn't come from forgiveness, but from finishing what had to be done. Weeks passed. Linda lawyered up, of course. She blamed stress, confusion, even me. Said I had manipulated my father into changing his will. Said the letter was fake. Said anything she could to muddy the water. But every time she opened her mouth, another piece of the mask fell off, and eventually, the only person still listening to her was her overpriced attorney. As for me, I didn't move back into the house. I couldn't. The rooms were too quiet in the wrong way, and the memories, even the good ones, felt like they belonged to someone else. Instead, I sold it, gave half the money to a foundation that helps families fight elder abuse, and kept the rest to rebuild somewhere no one knew Linda's name or mine. I didn't want revenge to become my legacy. I just wanted peace. But I did keep one thing, a slice of that infamous cake, wrapped in plastic and frozen, like evidence or a warning or maybe both. Every once in a while, I take it out of the freezer, look at it under the light, and remind myself that monsters don't always have fangs. Sometimes they wear pearls and bake cake and smile as they poison what you love most. Maybe justice wasn't everything I'd hoped for. Maybe the system couldn't pin her down completely. But the world knows what she did. She knows I know what she did. And that knowledge, that slow-burning truth, is going to follow her longer than any jail sentence ever could. Some people say revenge doesn't bring peace. I don't know about that. Because after all this, I slept like a baby.